Here's how to zero in on what works both in your daily activity and in creating the outcomes that you're looking for. It's a abstract approach, but if you pay close attention, you're going to be able to discover trends in the marketplace and how to gain points of leverage to get, again, the outcomes that you're looking for. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. Now, we cover some very advanced stuff in the private client group, but I want to just give you a sample of how Facebook and Google, actually Twitter does it too, a lot of these platforms use topics of the day to gather information about your individual interests. They're really building portfolios or dossiers on each user. Now, with technology, you can do this on a massive scale. It is mass surveillance by every measure. In the past, it used to be like the FBI might have a file on somebody, or you might have a file on top customers, and you were keeping track of their interests. And so when you sent that client gift, you would send a gift that was relevant to them. If you were going to like a salesperson walking in a room, they might see a baseball trophy for their kid, and that's a conversation point. Well, today, their social media platforms and the internet are using what's called a topic testing method in order to start profiling you. And they do that with user-generated content. Now, this is a concept that can really concern people because on a massive scale, these private companies are gathering information about you, building up profiles, and then putting in front of you what is most likely for you to buy. Now, it's better to have happen in a private company than inside of a government organization, but for the purposes of commerce, they can understand intimate details about who you are, what you think, and even subconscious bias in your behaviors. Now, this is powerful, and if you understand how it works, you can use it to understand the needs of a marketplace, to understand who you should be talking to and who you shouldn't be talking to. You can use it in your marketing. You can use it in public influence, such as a campaign for a political position. And the way it works is by providing small decisions for your target audience. So, for example, Facebook has user-generated content. Now, they filter the content a little bit here and there, but people either click or don't click. They like or they don't like. Now, if they like content, they've clicked on a little thumbs up. If they don't like it, they've just moved on. They haven't spent any time with that particular element. What this creates up is called a binary decision. So there's a yes or a no. There's no gradients. It's yes or a no. If they show you things like the yeses that you've presented, there's a higher probability that you'll also like that. So, for example, if you were shown 5 fruits and you clicked yes to the apple more often than the banana, showing you something like an apple is more likely to get a yes. So now they've understood your preference is apple versus banana. It's a very simple concept that's used in statistics to forecast the probability of an activity. So if you show somebody pictures of faces and the person looking at the face was more likely to rate a face of a certain ethnic group as higher in trust and lower in reliability, then you would actually be able to determine the bias by randomly showing them the different faces. So if you're getting a high level of trust of somebody who has a matching racial profile, then you could test that by showing someone who doesn't have that and see if the ratings are consistent. Over time, you could predict that person has what's called an in-group bias. And now when you present them an advertisement, you want to show them something that looks like them. Now, there are people that have an out-group bias. And so you would actually show a different ad to the person who has the out-group bias. These are actually innate psychological profiles that are being developed. And that's why I am often concerned about these profiles being stolen or the profiles manipulating the individual. So we do know from several cases that Russia presented political advertising with ridiculous statements. So they showed Democrats ridiculous statements about Trump being a racist and all this stuff. They showed Trump supporters ridiculous statements about the Democrats killing babies. And they were essentially using advertising campaigns to kind of profile their visitor. So one thing you can do if you've got a business or you want to understand a large market is you can actually use ad campaigns to send somebody to a website to start profiling and segmenting these individuals into what's called a retargeting campaign. Now, you might not know any of this stuff exists, and it might be freaking you out a little bit, but it's part of our modern world. In the past, you would do it by sending letters to people and inviting them to become part of a newsletter. So as a selling professional, I would send out letters to, so I was selling fleet fuel, for example. I would send out letters and I would have interactions with prospects who bought fleet fuel or bought petroleum product, and I'd get them to raise their hand and fill out a small survey about what things they were interested in. And then based on those surveys, I wrote a monthly newsletter that would address their interests, but also make offers for the products and services that I was selling. I could reach 1,000 people. I could reach 2,000 people faster that way. And then I could also abstract that if people like them are interested in similar topics, then they might be responsive to certain concepts. And then again, I could build that newsletter. So I ended up with this kind of farm club of clients. It was like 100, 200 individuals, but I was selling fuel in a regional area. But it gave me a really good idea about who the customer was. What was the customer's interests? What were the motivating factors? Now, I did keep additional information. I know this sounds creepy, guys, but this is what salespeople are supposed to be doing when you're selling high-ticket, 6-figure, 7-figure type things. I actually kept additional information. So if I visited a client and they were into baseball, I would put them on the baseball list. If they were into racing, I'd put them on the racing list. And then what basically happened, if I came across race tickets, I wouldn't offer them to the baseball person. I'd offer them to the sports people because I knew they had a high level of interest in racing. If I had a local, like the I don't want to say little league, but the amateur league baseball, if I had tickets for those folks, I would send it to the baseball people. Now, what I'd also do is I'd look at the geographic location and look for clusters of customers. And so when I'm prospecting in that area, I would give an example, because a lot of times you're going to get asked, who are your clients? I would give an example of clients that were geographically close to the company. When I'm selling a product with strategic advantage, I might mention a competitor. I might say, hey, this is such a strategic advantage. You should be involved with this. This is going to give you these benefits. And by the way, companies like so-and-so are already using this product to destroy their competitors. Now, the customer I'm talking with is like having this pressure. That's why they're meeting with me. And now they know their competitor has it. I can use a phrase like, to be on an equal playing field, this is almost required in today's economy. And so they'll come on board. Now, of course, the product has to actually benefit the individuals, but they'll come on board because of the social pressure that someone opposite of them is already benefiting from something. They feel left out, and then you can move them towards a solution. Now, again, I always talk about the ethics of this stuff because it is possible, and Facebook has had trouble with this before, it is possible to manipulate the behavior of the viewer by what you show them. So Facebook has built up these profiles, and they were actually testing whether positive messages had an influence of people staying on the site versus negative messages, people staying on the site. And it was found that the negative messages, the negative news, actually caused users to stay on the Facebook site for longer. Now, what happens to an individual who is constantly barraged with negative messages? Well, it builds up their cortisol levels. There's a physiological response. There's a psychological response. They may see the world as being more negative than it actually is. And that could lead to suicide. That could lead to bad behaviors. That could lead to drug and alcohol abuse. So ultimately, I'm teaching you things and I'm introducing you to concepts that you really have to be careful with. I want you to work with somebody who is ethically monitoring the activities that you're doing. Even when I was creating profiles and dossiers on clients for $6-figure and $7 million seven-figure opportunities. So, for example, a client going after a $7 million contract, we knew everything we could know about the decision makers for that particular contract. I had a manager or I had peers that would measure things. because this can go the wrong way. This can go into blackmail. Maybe somebody is concerned about their lifestyle, and they don't want their lifestyle to be out in the public, and you happen to know about their lifestyle. You don't go in there and use that as a leverage point to get opportunity. A good example is Jeffrey Epstein. Some of the people that fell into the Epstein circles could be there because he deliberately put them in an awkward position. He was having these dinner parties and inviting famous people, and when these famous people showed up, they had an instant association with the person who organized the party, but it's not always clear whether they knew who was organizing the party. Sure, they knew who might be showing up, who else might be invited. They might have gotten a letter from one of their friends inviting them to this party and not knowing who the sponsor of the party was. And then they kind of get pulled into this web. The show Billions is a really good example of how people would get pulled into webs and not really understand the problem that they're getting in because they had their own desires that overrode their logic for decision making. Another good show is Hustle, that actually shows how it's this stuff's entertainment, by the way, but the show Hustle from the BBC actually showed how people would set up for scams. So confidence scams is the negative side of what we're describing today. But the positive side is to better serve your customers. The more you understand about the customer's needs and desires, the better you can deliver to the customers. Now, when we're talking about big corporations, Fortune 100 corporations, better understanding your customers prevents you from making stupid mistakes like supporting a popular topic in the marketplace. So Pride Month. If your customers are not excited about that, you probably don't want to go all in promoting it. And I'm not making a judgment on whether that's right or wrong, because on that particular discussion, people are on both sides. It's over glamorized and it's often makes people look bad. It's right to get out the awareness, but underlying how that awareness is going out, not everybody agrees upon. But when you're working with complex topics, your strategic communications department or your approach to that communications has to be more than just, I think it's a good idea. We have John McAfee, who recently passed away in a Spanish prison. Many of his ideas were very controversial, and many of his presentations had a lot of controversy to them. But the individual, he could have had mental challenges. He could have had legitimate outside pressures. There's so many angles to that. Even opinioning on that particular topic puts you at risk of judgment or showing up in a profile that makes you look unfavorable. This is where I bridge to the value of being able to move across the internet without being seen. And I know this sounds like it doesn't fit the original topic of being able to test people's behaviors to categorize individuals into market segments or understand how they can be influenced by topics. But you don't want to be unduly influenced by the way search engines are manipulating and putting you in this bubble, by the way marketers are trying to show you things that they have test results to know you're going to behaviorally respond. And yeah, this could keep you from overspending, but it can also help you see news that isn't being shown in your country that could be strategic to decisions your organization has. I'll give you one example in the financial services industry. There hasn't been a lot of public talk about the impact of central bank digital currency, at least not in the United States. But if you're looking at the news in foreign countries and you're doing this through a proxy where they think you're in the country, you'll often see that a central bank currency is a bank killer. And the reason it's a bank killer is because the central bank will be able to monitor and control all transactions. So it's possible you could have a client who has a mortgage with your bank and the central bank turn off their money. Now you might be saying, well, why would a central bank turn off somebody's money? Well, if you're looking at Chinese news in Mandarin and in Chinese characters, you'll realize that through the social scoring system, the Chinese central bank shuts off people's digital currency. So if one country could do it, the other country, it's plausible that they might do it. But ultimately, if you're in the financial services industry, you may not want a central digitalized currency. Already, they're required to report to the FDIC individual transactions. And that's great. But if you're protecting your customers' interests, you might want to allow your customers some anonymity so that they can at least pay back the loans that you've given them. Because if some other agency shuts down their money, now if there's obvious criminal activity, they can still have their accounts frozen. But you're going to get a notification from the FBI. You're going to get a formal account seizure or closure. Not all of a sudden the client's money goes away. If the client's money all of a sudden goes away for some other factor than dumb mistakes and bankruptcy and all that stuff, that's one more risk that you've got a profile for. And that means a larger cash reserve for the bank and ultimately less mobility with that organization. Now, this hasn't been an example that I've discussed with a client. This isn't an example. This is just an example that something I've kept in my profile to keep in mind for my financial services clients that they are, there's a potential risk on the horizon. The underlying fact is understanding these models, and it really is a model, and it's a network of events, helps you understand your customers better and to better serve them. It helps you understand economic changes such as inflation. I called inflation in my special report, How to Profit from Inflation, as it was coming into 2020. But we've had inflation coming our way since 2008. Food prices went up during the Obama administration. They actually kept going up during the Trump administration. Lumber prices went up during Trump when they had the tariffs on Canadian wood products. And then when Biden came in place, they doubled the Canadian wood products tariffs. And then there were other issues like COVID that ultimately inflation is here. And will it be hyperinflation? Will it be otherwise? Private clients will discuss that. But ultimately, my point is, there are signals in the marketplace. You can deliberately set up those signals using advertising platforms so that you can get a specific set of signals around your individual clients. You can also hire services. I use services from time to time that'll give you details about what the interests of your clients might be or the particular points of interest might be. But you have to understand that you're also being measured. And because you're being measured, there are times you want to be unmeasurable. You want to go into the marketplace where you look like a new prospect, clean slate. So the Facebook platform gives you the generic information. They have less of a model to work on, so they give you the broadest display. You want to be able to read news sites. If you bring up in a privacy browser versus your regular browser, the front page of popular news sites, you're going to see different content. If you are in Germany and you pull up CNN's first page, and you're in the United States and bring up CNN's first page, you're going to see different headlines. This is important to know exists because they're testing to help serve the customer, but they could also be testing to show the right message to that audience group. So you may not know that the U.S. embargoes in Iran have actually caused hyperinflation in that country. Yet their hyperinflation still has product prices on food that are far below the U.S. prices on food. And if you're in the agricultural business, you might want to know that because there are impacts that might influence either the price going too high in the marketplace where your customers can't buy product, and this is happening right now with beef. The product's being shipped outside, and we're buying cheaper meat for the U.S. market because the U.S. market can't afford to pay these higher prices, but there are countries that will pay these higher prices, so you have to shift the product. Underlying facts here is when you understand these measures are in place, when you understand these perceptions are being and these filters are given to you on your internet, for example, you can actually go in there and see this stuff raw. You can get search results that are not filtered for you as an individual, that are just the results, and you will discover things that were unknown. The NATO exercises, Russian ships off of Hawaii, all these activities, geopolitical activities, industry-related activities. You'll start consuming information in a more deliberate and beneficial way, which helps you drive the outcomes that are important to your business. Now, one word of warning. Done the wrong way, this can be a huge distraction. And it can lead you down rabbit holes, and it can be a mess. What you need is a strategic approach based on the outcomes you'd like to achieve and a means of testing your assumptions. Now, if you're talking about this in a marketing context, that might be direct response marketing and the analytics and measures you put around it. If you're talking about it in a fundraising concept or activity, it could be segmented newsletters that go out to your different interest groups. If you're talking about it from a business risk management perspective, it could be a specific set of risks that are agreed upon as applicable to the business itself. Focus on the outcomes and you'll get the results. I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. I understand that some of the topics that I introduced to you are just complex. That's why if you visit www.insidestrategicrelations.com, you can ask your questions. Ask questions about implementation for your specific needs. Ask questions about how to use these concepts to generate a higher revenue, better incomes, better career opportunities. I have been able to move prior to the .com into the .com world. Prior to the .com crash into the .com world, doubled money on silver, get ahead of quite a few bubbles using this particular technique of topic testing in order to determine what larger audiences would be interested in. So if you want to talk specifically about how to apply this in your business, and of course you have a $1 million plus business or $1 billion plus business, we can talk about these things in the strategic communication side. We can talk about it in the risk management application. But ultimately, don't let this topic pass you by without even thinking about how you could be manipulated, how the marketplace could be better performing in your industry, how you can get ahead of problems and know about things that others are not seeing. You can literally see around corners understanding this concept. And again, in a 20-minute podcast, I'm not able to cover all the details, so please ask your questions. Again, I'm Justin Hitt with Inside Strategic Relations. You can ask your questions at www.insidestrategicrelations.com. I'm here to help you create key profitable customers and transform business relationships into profits guaranteed.